There's a pattern that repeats itself quietly, often invisibly, until you're in the thick of it. You've probably seen it before. That person who lashes out, overreacts, sabotages relationships. But when you look closer, you realize there's pain beneath it. Hurt that never healed. And somewhere along the way, they learn to cope. Not by healing, but by wounding others. The phrase wounded people, hurt people isn't just poetic. It's a psychological truth. And today we're going to unpack it. Not to justify bad behavior, but to understand where it comes from and how to stop that cycle from continuing through you. Most of us carry emotional wounds: childhood neglect, betrayal, abandonment, abuse, humiliation, rejection. These things don't just fade. They imprint. They alter the way we see ourselves, others, and the world. And when that pain isn't processed, when it's buried instead of healed, it doesn't stay quiet. It festers. It leaks out in unexpected ways. Sometimes as anger, sometimes as withdrawal, sometimes as manipulation or control. People who are wounded often don't even realize how much their pain is steering the wheel. They may appear cold, distant, arrogant, defensive, but what you're really seeing is armor protection, a subconscious survival strategy, and it works at first, but eventually it begins to poison the relationships that mean the most to them. Here's the paradox. The people who hurt us the most are often the ones who are hurting the most inside. That doesn't mean we excuse what they do, but if we want to break the cycle, we have to stop treating the symptom and start understanding the root. Many people wounded in childhood grow up with core beliefs like I'm not enough, I can't trust anyone, if I show weakness, I'll get hurt. These beliefs become the blueprint for how they behave in adulthood. They push people away before they can be abandoned. They control situations to avoid feeling helpless. They criticize others before others can criticize them. The pain becomes a lens, a distorted one, and through it, they misinterpret intentions, overreact to perceived threats, and replicate the very behaviors they once suffered from, often without even knowing it. Take, for example, someone who grew up with emotionally distant parents. They learn early on that vulnerability gets ignored or worse, mocked, so they become hyper-independent. Cold, dismissive when a partner asks for connection. They shut down not because they don't care, but because that part of them was shut off long ago, and they never learned how to turn it back on. Or someone who was bullied. They internalize shame. They believe love has to be earned. So in adulthood, they become people pleasers. But that constant self-abandonment breeds resentment, and eventually they start lashing out. Not because they're mean, but because they've been denying their own needs for so long, the pressure becomes too much wounded. People rarely realize they're bleeding on people who didn't cut them. They think they're protecting themselves, but in doing so, they often become the very source of pain they're trying to avoid. And here's where it gets deeper. Emotional wounds don't just shape behavior, they shape identity. If you were constantly criticized, you may become the kind of person who criticizes others. Not because you want to hurt them, but because that voice of judgment became internalized. You believe it's normal, necessary. Even you hold others to impossible standards because you hold yourself to them. That's the heartbreaking cycle. Pain turned inward becomes shame. Pain turned outward becomes blame. And when left unhealed, wounded people bounce between the two, hating themselves and hurting others, without ever truly understanding why. But here's the part that can change everything. The cycle only continues when it's unconscious. The moment you become aware of it. When you stop and say, wait, where is this coming from? That's the beginning of healing. Most people think healing is about feeling better, but often it starts with feeling worse. Because to heal, you have to confront the wound. You have to feel what you never allowed yourself to feel. The grief, the rage, the abandonment. And that takes courage. Most people aren't taught to cultivate. Society doesn't encourage us to sit with pain. It encourages us to suppress, distract, numb, perform. But pain that is ignored doesn't disappear. It gets louder. It sabotages our relationships, our health, our peace of mind. Wounded people often fear intimacy because intimacy requires openness. And when you've been hurt deeply, openness feels like danger. You may crave connection, but sabotage it the moment it appears. Because connection risks rejection, vulnerability, risks abandonment, so you push it away before it can push you. The tragic irony: many wounded people end up alone, not because they want to be, but because they don't believe they're worthy of love, so they test people. They build walls, they demand loyalty but offer distance. They say I don't care when they care deeply, because showing they care feels like handing someone a weapon. This is why healing is essential, not just for the person hurting, but for everyone around them. Because unhealed trauma isn't just a personal burden, it's contagious. It spreads. It teaches children how to distrust themselves. It conditions partners to question their worth. It bleeds into workplaces, friendships, communities. But healing is possible. It doesn't happen overnight, and it's not always pretty. It starts with awareness, with getting radically honest about the patterns you've been repeating, with asking yourself, what am I protecting? What pain have I never faced? It also takes responsibility, and this is key. There's a difference between explanation and excuse. Your wounds may explain your behavior, but they don't excuse it. Once you become conscious of your pain, you become responsible for what you do with it. You can either pass it on, or you can begin the difficult work of transforming it. This isn't about self-blame. It's about reclaiming your power. Because as long as you're run by unconscious wounds, you're not free. But when you bring them into the light, when you start to see your triggers as teachers, when you learn to sit with discomfort instead of escaping it, you stop being a slave to your past, and something incredible begins to happen. You start responding instead of reacting. You pause before lashing out. You begin to recognize when you're projecting your pain onto someone else. You apologize without defensiveness. You set boundaries without guilt. You start showing up in relationships, not as a wounded child, but as an integrated adult. This is the real work, the shadow work, the kind of transformation that doesn't always look good on Instagram, but changes lives behind closed doors. You stop needing people to carry your pain for you. You stop punishing the world for what it didn't do. You take ownership, not of the pain you received, but of the healing you choose to create. And as you heal, something else shifts. You develop compassion, not just for yourself, but for others. You start to see the wounded child behind someone's anger, the heartbreak behind someone's coldness, the fear behind someone's control. And while you no longer tolerate abuse, you also stop taking it personally. You stop fighting wounded people with more wounding. You begin to hold space for yourself and for others. It's not easy. There will be days where the pain feels too big, where your old patterns feel safer. But every time you choose to sit with that pain, instead of running from it, you rewrite the story. You begin to show your nervous system that it's safe to feel, that healing is possible, that you don't have to become what hurt you. This is the way the cycle ends, not with vengeance, not with blame, but with someone, maybe you deciding it ends with me. So the next time someone hurts you, pause. Ask yourself, is this about me, or is it about them? And when you're the one hurting others, have the courage to ask, what part of me is still unhealed? Because the world doesn't need more wounded people pretending they're fine. It needs more brave souls willing to do the uncomfortable work of healing, if that's you. Welcome. This journey won't be easy, but it will be worth it. Because when you stop hurting others and stop hurting yourself, you don't just heal, you free every future version of yourself who would have lived trapped inside that pain. You break the chain, and that's where everything changes. Maybe the greatest act of rebellion in a world built on pain is healing quietly, relentlessly, choosing every day not to pass it forward, but to dissolve it where it lives in you. So if you've made it this far, know this: you've already taken the first step. The awareness is there. The question is, what will you do with it now? Because the world doesn't change through force. It changes through presence, through people who've dared to face the storm within, so they don't become the storm outside. And if that's a path you're ready to walk, you don't have to do it alone. Hit that subscribe button and stay with us, because this space right here is for those ready to rewrite the story. Not with rage, not with blame, but with truth. Your healing isn't selfish, it's generational. Let's keep going together.